Some people just aren't cut out for real medicine. That is what Dr. Ashford said 47 minutes before everything he built would begin to crumble. He didn't know it yet. Neither did the hospital. Neither did the temp nurse moving through the ICU at 11:47 p.m. with a clipboard and hand steady as surgical steel, already 3 steps ahead of every mistake he would make. The night shift at St. Michael's in Savannah hums with fluorescent buzz and antiseptic burn. The ICU holds 8 patients, 3 nurses, and a silence so thick you could operate in it. Rachel Torres moves through the corridor with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. Her scrubs are wrinkled at the hem from a 14-hour shift that started at 4 a.m., but her charts are immaculate. Every vitals line is precise. Every medication entry timestamped. Every discrepancy flagged and annotated in blue ink that doesn't smudge. She is 28 years old. She has been a registered nurse for 4 months. She has been a Special Forces commander for 12 years. One of those identities is currently folded and hidden beneath her locker in the break room. Rachel pauses at the med dispensary, her left hand trembling slightly as she reaches for the 4 drip. Not from fear. From muscle memory. From a memory of shrapnel and sand and screaming. She closes her fist. The trembling stops. Pain is information. Pain is data. She pulls the medication and moves on, her limp barely visible now, the one that favors the left leg after the Hindu Kush tried to keep it. At the nurse's station, Dr. Harrison Ashford is reviewing shift reports with the intensity of a man who has something to hide. His tie is expensive. Italian silk. His cufflinks are gold. His expression is the kind of pleasant that doesn't reach his eyes. He has been the head of surgery at St. Michael's for 7 years, and in those 7 years he has learned exactly how much you can take before anyone notices. He's been skimming surgical codes. Small amounts. 15% here, 20% there. $23,000 in the last quarter alone, split 3 ways with an anesthesiologist named Dr. Chen and a billing administrator named Marcus Webb. It's working perfectly. It's been working perfectly for 3 years. Until Rachel Torres started on the temp roster 6 months ago. Her chart is open on the desk in front of him. Tonight's shift. 2 billing discrepancies. 2. He stares at the notations in the margin. Code 43210 billed twice for single procedure, line 47. Post-op imaging charged to wrong patient account. Highlighted in yellow. Annotated with the kind of precision that makes people ask follow-up questions. Last week it was 1 discrepancy. The week before, 3. She notices everything. She flags everything. She does it quietly, without drama, without going to anyone else, she just documents it, which is somehow worse than if she screamed about it, because documentation is forever. Dr. Ashford closes the file and smiles. A small smile. A smile like a wolf showing its teeth. Some people just aren't cut out for real medicine, he says to the 2 residents standing beside him, his voice carrying just far enough down the corridor. Just far enough for the woman with the clipboard to hear it, even though she doesn't stop walking, even though she doesn't look back. They're good at process. Paperwork. But real medicine? Saving lives? That takes a different kind of mind. One of the residents, a nervous kid named Patterson, laughs a little too loudly. The sound doesn't reach Rachel. She's already at room 447, already entering the space where everything is about to change, already unknowing that a 15-year-old boy is waiting to recognize her. Room 447 is quiet except for the ventilator wheeze. The patient is Ethan Brooks, 27, Special Forces operator, 2nd Platoon, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, a dark horse, though none of that matters anymore because 3 weeks ago a training accident punched something through his larynx and took his voice away. 7 specialists have seen him. 7 doctors have shaken their heads and used the word permanent. Admiral Richard Brooks, Ethan's father, wears his uniform when he visits and says nothing while his son stares at the ceiling with the kind of rage that has nowhere to go. Rachel enters with the chart already read, already knowing the details: vocal cord paralysis, negative for aspiration, feeding tube placed, physical therapy twice daily with no progress. She's read this file 6 times. She has seen it the way a pilot sees runway numbers before descent as data to navigate. She moves to the for stand without speaking and begins checking the hang time on the saline drip. Her movements are efficient. Economical. The kind of movements that suggest someone has done this 10,000 times before, not for months. Ethan watches her. Actually watches her? Not the way patients usually watch, which is with the desperation of the trapped. He watches her the way someone watches a person they thought was dead. His hand moves across the bed table, fumbling for the whiteboard. The marker drops. Rachel catches it before it hits the floor. One motion. No thought behind it. The reflexes of someone who spent 12 years in places where dropped things could mean dropped people. She hands him the marker without speaking. He writes something. His hand shakes slightly. The letters are large and irregular. Do I know you? Rachel reads the message. She does not answer. She places the whiteboard back on the table and adjusts his pillow with hands that feel like they belong to someone else. Up close, Ethan's eyes are the color of a stormy Atlantic, and they're filled with something that looks like hope or memory or both. You're on antibiotics prophylactically, Rachel says quietly, her voice lower than before, softer than before, a voice from another life. Feeding tube tolerance is good. No signs of aspiration. Swallow study next week. Ethan writes again, where did you go? Rachel doesn't answer that either. She checks his vitals, heart rate 73, steady, the kind of steady that comes from military conditioning, and makes a note on the chart. Date and time. 11:52 p.m. The notation is meticulous. Unnecessary. But precise. She leaves room 447 and moves back into the corridor. Behind her, Ethan is still staring at where she was, his hand still gripping the marker, his jaw working soundlessly as if he's trying to form words that don't exist anymore. The break room smells like old coffee and the industrial sadness of a hospital at midnight. Rachel enters at 3:04 a.m., after 12 hours of rounds, after 8 medication runs, after checking on 6 patients whose names will be in the obituary section of tomorrow's newspaper because that's the kind of night St. Michael's had. She opens her locker. Her scrubs are folded. Her shoes are lined up. Her phone is dark. Beneath everything, there is a flag. It's not a display flag. It's small. Personal. The kind of flag that's folded 3 times by someone with hands that know how to fold them, edges sharp as knife blades. She reaches for it without thinking and grips the counter with her other hand, staring at the flag and the wrinkles in the fabric and the way the blue section has faded from being touched too many times. 20 years ago, in a collapsed school building in Kandahar, a 7-year-old boy with a leg that wouldn't stop bleeding called her name while she worked. 20 years ago, she held pressure and sang to him in Spanish, lullabies her mother taught her, words about soldiers and home and things that don't exist anymore, and she gave a tendon in her left hand to make sure he kept the leg. Now he's in room for 47. Now he recognizes her. Now she has to pretend she doesn't recognize him. The folded flag is from a different kid. A different day. A different boy who didn't make it home. Rachel grips the counter harder. Her shoulders don't shake. Her jaw doesn't tremble. Only her hands move, only in the darkness of 3 a.m., only when no one is watching, only when the fluorescent lights can't see her anymore. She folds the flag back into its triangles and returns it to the locker beneath the scrubs that don't fit the person she used to be. What she doesn't know is that Dr. Ashford is upstairs in the surgical wing, reviewing her work again, making a list. Making a plan. Building a paper trail that will follow her into every room, every hallway, every moment she thinks she's invisible. He's going to break her? He doesn't know yet that breaking her is the exact moment everything he's built will fall. The overhead page crackled at 6:47 a.m., and every nurse on the floor froze. Dr. Ashford's voice carried through the speakers like a blade. Will G.I. Jane please report to the surgical wing? Your actual rank can stay in the parking lot. The surgical wing fell silent. An orderly smirked. A resident exchanged glances with a colleague. Rachel Torres looked up from her tablet, her meticulous notes on Ethan Brooks's vital trends, her documented observations about the inflammation markers in his blood work, the careful questions she'd left unanswered in the margins. Her jaw tightened fractionally. That was all. She set the tablet down, stood, and walked to the elevator without breaking stride. Her hands were steady on her scrub pockets. The elevator doors closed with a soft hiss of pneumatic air. The surgical wing was fluorescent white and antiseptic. She found Dr. Ashford outside the supply closet at the end of the corridor, his arms crossed, his expression composed but his eyes burning with something she recognized. She'd seen that look before. Not in combat zones. In ranks being climbed over bodies. He gestured her inside without speaking. The closet door clicked shut behind them, cutting off the ambient hum of the hospital. Metal shelving surrounded them on three sides, stacked with gauze rolls, compression bandages, sterile gloves in their white boxes. The air smelled like bleach and new plastic. Ashford stepped close, his presence filling the narrow space, his breathing deliberately controlled. He was backing her toward the shelves, his shoulders blocking the door. "Your little chart audits," he said, his voice low and tight, "they stop today. Effective immediately." His finger jabbed toward her shoulder but didn't quite make contact. "I've been building careers here since before you learned to empty a bedpan. I won't have some washed-up temp nurse with delusions of competence questioning my protocols. Questioning my decisions." His jaw worked. "Do you understand me?" Rachel met his eyes without blinking. She didn't step back. She didn't cross her arms or look away or say anything. Her breathing remained perfectly even. He was waiting for her to crumble, the way nurses usually did when a department head invaded their space, used his voice like a weapon, made his power visible in the form of proximity and dominance. She simply waited. The silence stretched. Ashford's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to silence. Silence usually meant compliance. But hers meant something else entirely, and somewhere deep in his nervous system, he recognized it. His finger lowered. "You're here because we needed warm bodies for night shift," he said, his voice quieter now but sharper, compensating. "Act like it. No more questions. No more charts. No more interference." She nodded once. He waited for her to apologize, to explain, to do anything but simply turn and open the door. She turned and opened the door. The hallway rushed back in, fluorescent light, the distant beeping of monitors, the soft squeak of a stretcher being pushed somewhere 3 floors down. She walked back to the elevator without looking back. In her peripheral vision, she could see him standing in the supply closet doorway, his hand gripping the frame, his knuckles white. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. By afternoon, Dr. Ashford had filed the paperwork. Not through HR. Through the chief of surgery. Rachel was in the parking lot during shift change, updating the night shift log on her tablet when she heard his voice cut across the asphalt like thunder. "Torres." 18 staff members froze mid-step. Residents heading home. Nurses arriving for the evening shift. 2 paramedics rolling an empty stretcher back to their unit. Effective immediately, you're reassigned from patient care to sanitation rotation. All floors. Bedpan duty. He was standing near the entrance, his posture radiating authority, his tone loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe that speed is more your speed. You'll report to the housekeeping supervisor for your new schedule." Rachel took the reassignment sheet from his hand. The paper was still warm. Her hands didn't shake. She looked at the sheet, new assignment code, new department, new hours, and nodded once. A resident winced. Another staff member looked away. The morning shift nurse supervisor pretended to check her phone. Rachel folded the sheet, placed it in her pocket, and turned back toward the entrance. Her gait didn't change. Her breathing didn't change. She looked like a woman who had just been assigned new duties. Nothing more. Ashford stood watching her walk past him, and something in his expression shifted. Confusion, maybe. Frustration. He'd expected humiliation to land like a punch. Instead, it had landed like rain on a windshield, visible for a moment, then gone. The evening shift started at 3 p.m. Rachel worked patient rounds, updated charts, monitored 4 lines. She moved from room to room like a ghost, efficient and present but somehow absent. No one made eye contact. Around midnight, when the ward fell quiet and the fluorescent lights seemed to hum louder, she entered the break room. It was empty except for the vending machine in the corner, the one that dispensed terrible coffee and bottled water. The hum of its cooling system was the only sound. Rachel gripped the counter edge with both hands and held on. Her knuckles went white. She was alone now. The public mask, the military precision, the absolute control, all of it could be set down for 7 minutes. She stared at the locker in front of her, the one with her name written on masking tape. Inside, folded into a precise rectangle, was a flag from the Hindu Kush. It had been carried home by a chaplain after the school building in Kandahar collapsed. Sarah Mendes's flag. The young medic who had been standing 3 meters away when the blast came, the one who should have been rotating home in 6 weeks, who should have walked into a civilian hospital in San Antonio to start nursing school in the fall. Instead, the flag came home. Rachel opened the locker and looked at it. The fabric was slightly faded, creased along the folds, exactly as it had been when it was placed in her hands 18 months after the explosion. She closed the locker again. Her breathing steadied. She walked back to the nursing station and continued her rounds, her hands rock-steady as she updated charts, as she documented vitals, as she made careful notes about Ethan Brooks's condition that Dr. Ashford would read in the morning and find ways to dismiss. At 11:22 p.m., she was restocking room 447 when she noticed it. Ethan Brooks's eyes tracking her movement with an intensity that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She paused, a stack of sterile 4x4 gauze squares in her hands. He was awake, though it was late, though he should have been asleep. His right hand moved to the bed rail. 3 short taps. 3 long taps. 3 short taps. SOS in Morse code. Her breath caught. She looked toward the doorway to make sure no one was watching. The hallway was empty. She stepped closer to his bed. Ethan's finger moved across the white sheet, tracing letters K-A-N-D-A-H and A-R. She knew before he finished. She knew the moment his finger started moving what word was being written. Her left hand, the one with the tendon damage from the blast, the scarring she kept hidden under long sleeves, trembled for the first time in 3 years. Not from fear. From recognition. Ethan's finger continued, S-C-H-O-O-L. And then numbers, 2, 0. 0, 4. 20 years ago. A 7-year-old boy trapped under concrete rubble, his femoral artery severed, blood loss accelerating toward cardiac arrest. Rachel had been Commander Rachel Torres then, and she had sung to him while her medic's hands worked, her voice in Spanish, Besé mucho, como si fuera esta noche la última vez, while she applied tourniquet technique, while she tied off the artery using suture material designed for something else because her surgical supplies had run dry. She had given part of her hand to keep him alive. Part of the tendons in her left palm, the ones that allowed a surgeon's precision, had been sacrificed because the kid bleeding out in front of her was worth more than her future. She'd never learned his name back then. Never saw him again. Never knew if he survived recovery. And now he was in room 447, vocal cords paralyzed from a training accident, eyes locked on hers with an intensity that carried 20 years of recognition. "You kept the leg," she whispered. He nodded. She checked his chart, 7 neurologists, 2 ENT specialists, all concluding permanent vocal cord paralysis. All recommending palliative care. Standard approach for irreversible injury. But Rachel's hands moved with the muscle memory of 3 tours, and she read the injury pattern the way a combat medic reads the terrain. Blast concussion compression. Not mechanical trauma. which meant the paralysis might be neurological inflammation, not structural damage. Which meant a high-dose steroid trial might reduce the swelling, might restore function, might give him his voice back. She wrote a note in the chart suggesting the intervention. Careful language. Deferential phrasing. Just a suggestion from just a temp nurse. She left the note in the chart and finished her rounds. By morning, the note was gone. In its place was a formal reprimand. Dr. Ashford had written, scope of practice violation by non-physician staff. Inappropriate clinical recommendations. Patient care decisions made without physician consultation. File updated. The HR file grew thicker. The paper trail grew longer. And in room 447, Ethan Brooks lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mouth opening and closing in silence, his eyes carrying the weight of recognition that the person who had saved his life once was being systematically destroyed by the institution that was supposed to protect her. Rachel is restocking room 447 at 11:22 p.m. when Ethan Brooks's eyes track her movement with an intensity that makes her pause. She feels the weight of his gaze like a laser finding its target. His head doesn't move. His body is paralyzed from the vocal cord injury down to mid-thorax, but his eyes follow her hands as she replaces the saline bag, checks the IV tubing, adjusts the monitor leads. Not the confusion of a sedated patient. Not the vacant stare of someone trapped in paralysis. Recognition. The kind of recognition that carries 20 years in a single glance. Rachel's jaw tightens fractionally. She continues her work without acknowledging what she sees, but her movement slow. Precise. A nurse simply checking vitals and inventory. But her left hand, scarred across the palm and ring finger from shrapnel that took a tendon when she was 24 years old, hovers over the bedside table a half-second longer than necessary. Ethan's right hand taps the bed in a specific pattern. 3 taps. 2 taps. 3 taps again. The rhythm finds her like a key in a lock that she didn't know was still latched inside her chest. That pattern. 20 years ago in Kandahar, in the rubble of a school building that had collapsed under an airstrike meant for a Taliban position 2 blocks away, a 7-year-old boy had tapped that pattern on a piece of rebar while his left leg bled out and Rachel's hands worked to apply a tourniquet and stop the hemorrhage. 3-2-3. The sequence he had learned from his father, a pattern tapped on wooden doors in the old city to signal that the coast was clear. He had tapped it then to stay conscious. To stay alive. To remind himself that someone was there, that hands were working, that he was not alone in the dark. Rachel keeps her face neutral. But her hands move to the pulse oximeter on his left index finger and she checks it with more focus than the readout requires. 94%. Stable. His heart rate is elevated, 108 beats per minute, but that could be pain, could be the paralysis, could be anything. His eyes find hers for half a second and then look away. They are a pale brown flecked with gold, the same color they had been when she had pulled him from beneath a concrete slab, singing to him in Spanish while she worked. Los pájaros cantan en la mañana. The birds sing in the morning. She had kept singing because his eyes were focused on her voice, on the rhythm of the Spanish syllables, on the promise that if he stayed conscious for 3 more minutes she could get him out and into the stretcher and he would not die in the rubble. He had not died. She checks his distal pulses with her fingertips pressed against the tops of his feet. Present. Warm. Good perfusion. The leg is intact, mobile within the paralysis that the medical record says resulted from a spinal cord contusion sustained in a blast injury in the Hindu Kush 12 years ago. Special Forces operator. Decorated. The chart notes he took shrapnel in the same region where Rachel had been stationed, the same mountainous terrain, the same thin air and impossible heat and roads that turned to rivers of dust. She had left there in pieces. He had left there paralyzed. But alive. Rachel completes her charting and turns to leave room 447 when the night supervisor finds her in the hallway outside Ethan's door. Her name tag reads Margaret Chen, RN, and her expression carries the kind of apologetic weight that comes with delivering bad news to someone who has already absorbed too much of it. Dr. Ashford wants you off the Brooks rotation, Margaret says quietly. Effective immediately. He's reassigning you to the West Wing, bedpan duty on the orthopedic floor. He cited inappropriate bedside manner and scope creep in your chart entries. He says you've been overstepping your authority as a temp nurse. Rachel nods once. Doesn't ask questions. Doesn't defend herself. That silence, that perfect, measured, unbothered silence, makes Margaret's shoulders drop because she knows what Rachel is and she knows what Ashford is doing and she hates the system that allows it. He also flagged your last 3 entries, Margaret continues, her voice dropping lower. The one about the steroid intervention for Ethan's paralysis, specifically. He restricted your access to certain medication logs and told the pharmacy not to discuss any orders with you directly. He said you were attempting to diagnose conditions outside your scope as a temporary employee. Rachel's jaw tightens. A visible tell, but only if you knew what to look for. Most people would miss it. Most people would see a tired nurse accepting bad news the way tired nurses accept bad news every shift in every hospital in America. But Margaret sees it, and she understands what that microsecond of tension means. I understand, Rachel says. Her voice is steady. Deferential. The voice of someone who has accepted the hierarchy and knows her place at the bottom of it. I'll move my things from the night supervisor desk and check in on orthopedics. She walks past Margaret without waiting for a response, her pace measured, her shoulders squared but not defiant. That walk is a study in acceptance. That walk says she has been pushed and she is retreating. That walk says the system has won and she is smart enough to know it. Margaret watches her go and then steps into room for 47. Ethan's eyes are fixed on the door where Rachel had exited. His right hand is clenched against the bed, the knuckles white, the 3-2-3 pattern reduced to a single finger tapping once. Twice. Waiting. At 1:43 a.m., Rachel finishes her sanitation rotation on the orthopedic floor and rounds back toward the central monitoring station. The night supervisor, Raymond, is asleep in the break room with his feet up on the folding chair, his chin resting against his chest in the way of people who have learned to sleep sitting upright. The night is quiet in that specific way that hospital nights are quiet, the ventilators and monitors creating a white noise of mechanical breathing, the distant hiss of 4 lines, the soft padding of nursing shoes on linoleum. But Rachel is no longer assigned to room 447. She has been removed from Ethan's care team by explicit directive. The chart is locked against her access. She is orthopedic bedpans now. She is nobody to that patient. She walks to room 447 anyway. The door is cracked open. The hallway lights cast a thin band of illumination across Ethan's face. She can see his eyes are open, staring at the ceiling, the subtle rise and fall of the ventilator assisting his breathing. She steps inside and closes the door quietly behind her. His calf is swollen. The skin is tight and shiny, stretched like the membrane of something about to burst. Rachel's hand moves to his lower leg before her brain fully processes what she is seeing. The swelling is new since her last check 2 hours ago, the circumference increased by at least ½ a centimeter. She presses her fingertips against the muscle. Rock hard. No give. No bounce. The tissue feels like it is under tremendous pressure, like something inside is screaming to get out and cannot. She checks the distal pulse at the top of his foot with her middle finger pressed into the space behind the ankle bone. Nothing. She feels for it at the groin. Femoralis. Present but weak. Thready. The blood is not reaching the lower leg anymore. Compartment syndrome. The pressure building inside the muscular compartment, a closed space bounded by fascia, is cutting off the blood flow. In 30 minutes his calf will be permanently damaged. In 90 minutes they will have to amputate the leg to prevent the rhabdomyolysis and kidney failure that follows tissue death. The window is not wide. The window is closing. Ethan's eyes find hers and stay there. His right hand begins to tap again. Frantically now. HURTS. 3 letters tapped in rapid sequence. Pain. Rachel hits the call button for Dr. Ashford and waits. 3 minutes pass. The monitor ticks. The ventilator cycles. Ethan's eyes are wide with the kind of fear that comes from understanding exactly what is happening to his body and being completely powerless to stop it. She pages Dr. Ashford again. Stat to room for 47. Compartment syndrome. Probable surgical emergency. Code. 8 minutes pass. She calls the surgical resident. The phone rings and goes to voicemail. She calls the on-call surgeon at home. His wife answers. Says he was just paged to the ER for a major trauma. 20 minutes out minimum. 13 minutes have passed. The fasciotomy in the Hindu Kush had been performed with field supplies on the floor of a forward operating base while mortars impacted 300 meters away. Rachel had used a scalpel from a dental kit and hands that knew exactly where to cut because she had done it twice before on soldiers whose compartments had swollen from crush injuries and blast trauma. The procedure was simple in structure: make the cut, release the pressure, save the limb. Simple in concept. Lethal if you miscalculated. She looks at Ethan. Sees the 7-year-old boy beneath the paralyzed man. Sees his left leg bleeding out in rubble while her voice sang to him. Los pájaros cantan en la mañana. The birds sing in the morning. Sees the moment she tied the tourniquet and his eyes focused on her face with the kind of absolute trust that only children have. Her hands don't shake. Rachel rolls the crash cart into room 447 and locks the door. The cart contains what she needs. She has loaded it carefully during her previous rotations, never taking anything, but positioning everything exactly where she would need it if a moment came. The moment has come. She opens the sterile field kit and lays out the instruments with the precision of someone who has done this in the dark, under fire, with a flashlight held between her teeth. The lateral fasciotomy requires a single incision along the outside of the lower leg, just anterior to the fibula, through the fascia that binds the muscle compartment. 6 centimeters. Straight. Deep enough to release the pressure but not so deep that she severs the peroneal nerve that runs just beneath the surface. She has the anatomy mapped in her mind the way some people have subway lines memorized. She does not ask for permission. She does not call Dr. Ashford a third time. She does not wait for protocols that will take 30 minutes to complete while Ethan's leg dies. She positions the crash cart so Ethan can see her work. She talks him through every stroke. Lateral fasciotomy for compartment syndrome. The incision is here, 6 centimeters, right along this line. I'm going to release the pressure inside the muscle. You're going to feel the pressure decrease. You might feel some sensation coming back. That's the nerves. That's good. That means blood is returning. Her voice is steady. Her hands move with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who has operated on dying people while bombs fell around them. The scalpel goes in. The hiss of air escaping. The muscle bulges against the skin as the pressure releases. Blood begins to flow back through the compartment. Within 40 seconds his pulse at the ankle returns. Strong. Full. Bounding. She applies pressure to the incision to control bleeding, talks him through the rest. It's over. The pressure is released. The blood is flowing. Your leg is saved. We're going to get you to surgery, they're going to close this properly, and you're going to keep that leg. You understand me? Ethan's eyes are flooded with tears but his hand taps 3 times. Yes. Thank you. I'm alive. Outside in the parking garage, Dr. Ashford sits in his Mercedes with the engine running, reviewing the personnel file on his laptop. The HR documentation against Rachel Torres is substantial. The overhead page incident. The supply closet confrontation. The parking lot reassignment. 3 flag chart entries. A documented pattern of scope creep and insubordination. He has built the case methodically, each incident recorded, each infraction dated and cross-referenced. By the end of the week, she will be terminated. By the end of the month, no one will remember her name. His phone shows 3 missed pages from room 447. He silences it and returns to his work, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he types the final notation in his file. Recommend immediate termination for cause. Risk to patient safety. Credentials inconsistent with temp nurse designation. He has no idea what is happening in room for 47. He has no idea that the woman he is systematically dismantling is performing emergency surgery with the steady hands of a commander who has saved lives in the Hindu Kush and is about to save one again. He has no idea that every choice he makes tonight is building toward a reckoning that will end his career, his reputation, and his freedom. The night is quiet except for the hum of the parking garage lights and the distant sound of sirens approaching St. Michael's from the south. The trauma alert is coming in. The surgical resident is on his way back. And in room for 47, Rachel is cleaning the incision site with methodical precision, her scarred hands moving with the certainty of someone who has held lives together and is not about to let this one slip away. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 hours later when Dr. Ashford reviewed the surgical log and discovered what Rachel had done. At 2:14 a.m., the monitor screamed. The alarm cut through the quiet of the night shift like a surgical blade, sharp, piercing, impossible to ignore. Rachel was 3 rooms down, updating charts with a pen that moved like it was on rails, when the sound registered. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look up from the page first and then decide. Her body was already moving, muscle memory from 20 years ago taking the wheel while her mind caught up. Room for 47. Ethan Brooks. She was there in 12 seconds. The calf was rock hard, swollen tight as a drum. She pressed her fingers against the tissue and felt nothing. No pulse. No warmth returning. Compartment syndrome didn't announce itself gently. It came like a silent thief, pressure building inside the fascial compartment, squeezing off blood supply, turning living tissue into necrotic meat in 30 minutes flat. Maybe 45 if luck was standing nearby. She'd seen it before. Not in hospitals. In field tents under canvas that smelled like diesel fuel and human desperation. Ethan's eyes met hers. He couldn't speak, his vocal cords were still paralyzed from the original injury, but his face asked the question every patient asks in that moment, am I going to keep this leg? Rachel's jaw tightened fractionally. I know. I see it. We're going to fix this. She moved to the phone. Page Dr. Ashford in his on-call room. No answer. She waited for minutes, time she couldn't afford to wait, but protocol demanded it anyway, and paged again. Dr. Ashford to room 447 stat. Compartment syndrome. Lower left leg. Stat. The silence that came back was its own kind of answer. Rachel stood very still for 3 seconds. Around her, the hospital breathed its 2 a.m. breath, ventilators wheezed, monitors beeped their steady rhythm, the ice machine hummed on the floor below like something alive. Her left hand, the one with the tendons that didn't quite work right anymore, flexed automatically. The scars there were thin and pale now, almost invisible in the fluorescent light. Almost. She turned to the crash cart. The lateral fasciotomy wasn't a procedure designed for temporary nurses. It was designed for trauma surgeons in operating rooms with anesthesia teams and hemostats and blood products ready to go. It wasn't designed for a woman working the night shift at a Savannah hospital with a scalpel meant for airway management and her own steady hands as the only thing standing between her patient and amputation. Rachel pulled on fresh gloves anyway. The latex snapped like gunshots in the quiet room. Ethan, listen to me. I'm calling Dr. Ashford now, but I need you to understand something. Her voice was the voice that had talked 17-year-olds through their first combat jump, the voice that had sung Spanish lullabies to a bleeding 7-year-old in the rubble of a school building in Kandahar. Your compartment is dying. 30 minutes, maybe 45. After that, no surgeon in Savannah can save the leg. But I can do this. Right now. You understand? His eyes held hers. One slow blink. Yes. She prepped the site with betadine. The iodine smelled sharp and clinical, nothing like the copper and sand smell of field surgery. Her hands moved with the fluid precision of something that had done this before, done it in worse conditions, with worse tools, with worse outcomes waiting if she failed. I'm going to make an incision along the calf, along the lateral compartment. You're going to feel pressure, significant pressure, but that pressure is the muscle pushing through the opening I'm creating. That's good. That means blood flow is coming back. The scalpel was small, designed wrong, but her angle was perfect. She'd cut anatomy before. 30 times. 40. She'd cut in darkness by penlight held in someone else's shaking hand while mortar fire walked closer. She'd cut while lying on her back in a makeshift tent with nothing but adrenaline and the knowledge that 3 lives depended on her steady hands. This was nothing. This was practice. Making the incision now. The blade bit through skin. Subcutaneous tissue. The fascia beneath felt exactly like she remembered, like cutting through leather, resistance then give. Blood welled up, but not the arterial spray that meant she'd hit something vital. She deepened the cut, working along the anatomical line, and felt the moment the pressure released. The muscle herniated through the opening like it had been waiting to escape. Ethan's breathing changed immediately, deeper, easier, the way lungs sound when oxygen is finally getting where it needs to go. She worked quickly, extending the incision, making sure the compartment was fully decompressed. Her left hand moved to find the distal pulse, and there it was, the femoral artery, now delivering blood again, warm and present under her fingers. Pulse is back. Leg saved, she said quietly. Not to convince Ethan. To convince herself. She bandaged the site with the precision of someone who understood that documentation was survival. Every layer placed exactly. Every tape applied with the care of someone who knew that in 12 hours, someone was going to look at this work and decide whether she lived or died professionally. The clock on the wall read 2:37 a.m. She paged Dr. Ashford a 3rd time. This time he answered, voice tight with something that wasn't quite rage but was standing in line waiting its turn. What do you need, nurse? Compartment syndrome. Lower left leg. Resolved. She paused. Let him understand what that meant. Fasciotomy at 2:23. Patient stable. Distal pulse present. Awaiting physician evaluation. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. I'm coming down. He was there at 2:47 a.m., moving through the door like a storm front. His eyes went to the incision and stopped. Rachel stood beside the bed with her hands folded, her expression the same one she'd worn when he'd backed her against the supply closet shelves. The same composure. The same absolute refusal to flinch. Dr. Ashford's face went carefully blank. He examined Ethan's leg without speaking. Checked the pulse twice. Looked at the documentation Rachel had prepared with handwriting that could have been printed by a machine. When he finally turned to face her, his voice was very soft. You performed a surgical procedure without physician authorization. Compartment syndrome. 30-minute window. No response to 2 pages. You exceeded your scope of practice. The leg would be gone. You falsified credentials by using surgical equipment. You obtained supplies from a crash cart without authorization. You endangered a patient by performing an unauthorized procedure. He stepped closer, and his voice dropped even lower. You violated Joint Commission Protocol 47B regarding non-physician surgical interventions. There are 6 separate policy violations in the last 10 minutes. 6. Rachel's jaw tightened fractionally. But she met his eyes without blinking and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. By 6:15 a.m., Dr. Ashford had filed formal complaints with HR. By 8:30 a.m., he'd presented documentation showing Rachel had been explicitly removed from Ethan's care team, making the fasciotomy not just unauthorized but insubordinate. By 9:30 a.m., he was standing at the nurse's station in front of the morning shift, handing her a termination notice printed on hospital letterhead. Effective immediately, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. For reckless endangerment and falsification of credentials. Security will escort you to retrieve your personal items, then you're off the property. Rachel took the letter. Her hand didn't shake. She read the first line, folded it carefully, and nodded once. She could have explained. Could have told them about the Hindu Kush, about the 14 lives saved, about the Navy Cross sitting in a shadow box that wasn't hers to claim. Could have said the words that would have changed everything. She turned in her badge instead. By 10:15 a.m., she was at her locker. The cracked mug that said "World's Okayest Nurse" went into the box. The dying succulent followed. Her scrub top with the coffee stain from 3 weeks ago. And then, from the bottom of the locker where no one at St. Michael's had ever seen it, the folded flag. The one carried out of the Hindu Kush when Corporal Sarah Mendez didn't come home. Rachel wrapped it carefully in a clean towel and placed it in the bottom of the box like it was made of something more fragile than fabric. The photo of her team came next, 12 faces in desert camouflage, standing in front of a building that used to be a medical clinic. Corporal Mendez's face was circled in faded permanent marker. Rachel had drawn that circle the day the flag arrived. By noon, she was standing at a rain-soaked bus stop on Highway 80. The cardboard box was getting heavier as the rain soaked through from the bottom. She didn't move. Just stood there, watching traffic pass, listening to the rain hammer the asphalt like applause for something that didn't deserve celebration. 3 days later, she was taking orders at Mel's Diner, pouring coffee into white ceramic cups, moving between tables with a kind of efficiency that came from 3 years of night shift nursing. The name tag said Rachel. Not Commander. Not the woman who'd saved 14 lives. Just Rachel, waiting tables for tips that didn't add up to rent. That was when her 15-year-old son Marcus walked into St. Michael's carrying a shadow box. Inside were medals. Marcus had found them in her closet, the ones Rachel had never displayed, never mentioned, had kept sealed in their cases like evidence of a crime. He walked to the security desk at 10:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning and set the box down with the care of someone handling something sacred. "My mom just got fired from here," he said, his voice steady in a way that made Rachel, 3 miles away at the diner, suddenly understand that some kinds of courage skip generations. "And you need to see these." The security guard was Dale Hutchins, 72 years old, 2 tours in Vietnam, the kind of man who recognized what he was looking at before Marcus opened his mouth. Dale stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the tile floor with a sound that made heads turn. He lifted the Navy Cross, read the first line of the citation aloud, his voice carrying to the elevator banks, for extraordinary heroism during combat operations in the Hindu Kush. By the second sentence, visitors were stopping mid-stride. By the fourth sentence, a woman in a cardigan was calling upstairs. Retired General William Cartwright came down in the elevator still wearing his visitor's badge from post-op. He was 81 years old and he moved like someone who understood what he was reading before the words fully formed. He took the citation from Dale's hands and his voice filled the atrium like a command. Commander Rachel Torres established a field hospital under fire for 72 hours, saving 14 lives, refusing evacuation despite combat injuries, demonstrating extraordinary courage under extreme duress. And then the stairwell door opened. Ethan Brooks appeared on crutches, his leg bandaged from the fasciotomy Rachel had performed 72 hours ago, his voice a rough rasp that had never worked right since Kandahar but was loud enough now that the entire lobby fell silent to hear it. "That child was me," he said. "Kandahar, 2004. She pulled me from a building. She saved my life when I was 7. Yesterday, she saved my leg. And Dr. Ashford fired her for it." The silence lasted exactly 10 seconds. The hospital CEO, standing by the coffee station with a styrofoam cup in his hand, asked quietly, "Where is Commander Torres now?" Marcus said, "Highway 80. Mel's Diner. Waiting tables." The CEO's assistant was already on her phone. By morning, 6 separate policy violations sat in a neat manila folder on Dr. Ashford's desk. Scope of practice breach. Unauthorized surgical intervention. Falsification of credentials. Reckless endangerment. Deviation from Joint Commission Protocol for Point 7.2. Performing procedures outside her licensure tier. Each one was real. Each one was true. Each one would stick like a blade between her ribs. He walked into the nurse's station at 7:14 a.m. with the termination letter printed on hospital letterhead, his tailored jacket still crisp from the dry cleaner, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Rachel was updating Ethan's chart, his vitals stable, his leg saved, his life secured by a procedure that would now cost her everything. She didn't hear Ashford approach. She didn't need to. She felt the shift in air pressure the way apex predators sense a change in hunting ground. Commander Torres. He said her rank like it was a slur. 18 nurses froze. 12 residents turned. For orderlies stopped pushing supplies. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical hymn above them. We need to speak. My office. Now. Rachel set down her pen. Closed the chart. Stood with the deliberate slowness of someone who had learned long ago that rushing showed fear. She didn't look at any of them, not the colleagues who suddenly found their computers very interesting, not the residents who suddenly discovered pressing needs 3 floors down. She walked past Ashford into the hallway, her scrub still damp from the emergency, her hand steady as surgical lasers even though she knew what was coming. His office smelled like leather and expensive cologne and the particular staleness of air that never saw an open window. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Savannah's downtown, the kind of view that cost money and connections in equal measure. The folder landed on his mahogany desk with the weight of a gavel. 6 violations. 7 if we count the credential falsification. Ashford's voice moved like a tank idling in a garage, low, controlled, all the more dangerous for its quietness. You performed a surgical procedure. You have no surgical privileges. You have no board certification. You have no right. Rachel didn't sit. Didn't defend. Didn't explain. Your temp contract is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You'll turn in your badge, your access card, and your parking pass. He slid the pink slip across the desk like it was a playing card in a game he'd already won. We're reporting this to the state nursing board. They'll decide whether to launch a formal investigation into your credentials. My guess is they will. My guess is this ends your career entirely. She picked up the termination letter. Read it. Folded it once and placed it in her pocket without a word. Don't you want to explain yourself? Ashford leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth like he'd just watched something small and wounded twitch under his foot. Don't you want to tell me why you knew how to perform a fasciotomy? Why your hands moved like you'd done it 1,000 times before? Where exactly did a temp nurse from a contract agency learn field surgery? The room held its breath. Rachel could taste copper in her mouth. One word would change everything. One sentence would expose the very thing she'd spent 3 years hiding. One explanation would cost her the anonymity that had kept her safe, kept her invisible, kept her able to walk through the world as nobody. She turned toward the door. You're not leaving this conversation. Not a request. It was a command, but commands only worked if the other person agreed to follow them. Yes, I am, Rachel said. Her voice didn't crack. Didn't waver. Dropped an octave from the deferential temp nurse he'd been terrorizing for 6 weeks. I'm turning in my badge. As instructed. She walked out of his office. Walked past the stunned residents. Walked to the badge office and turned in her credentials, the temporary ID that had given her access to rooms and charts and the kinds of knowledge that made a difference. The badge clattered against the tile counter with a sound like finality. Security escorted her to the parking lot at 7:47 a.m. She carried nothing but the knowledge of what she'd done, the certainty that Ethan would live, and the absolute understanding that the cost would be paid in silence, just like every other choice she'd made since the Hindu Kush. By noon, Rachel Torres was standing at a rain-soaked bus stop on Victory Drive, clutching a cardboard box containing a cracked ceramic mug that read "World's Okayest Nurse," a dying succulent with drooping brown leaves, and a photograph of her unit from 18 years ago. 14 faces arranged in 3 rows. One of them circled in permanent black marker. Sarah Mendez. The one who didn't come home. The rain fell like bullets. Not the soft kind that nourished things. The kind that wore them down. She'd stood in rain like this before, in the mountains above Kandahar, waiting for a dust-off that took 40 minutes too long, holding pressure on a 7-year-old's leg while his father wept in Pashto and she sang Spanish nursery rhymes in a voice that didn't crack. She'd stood in rain like this in a forward operating base in Nangarhar province while CASEVAC helicopters landed and took off and sometimes came back empty. She'd stood in rain like this on the day they buried Sarah with full military honors and Rachel had folded the flag herself, her hands the only one steady enough to do it right. The bus arrived at 12:34 p.m. She got on. Got off at the Greyhound station. Bought a one-way ticket to any place that wasn't Savannah. Ended up at Mel's Diner on Highway 80, 6 miles west of the city, where the owner didn't ask questions and the pay was minimum wage and the grease stains on her apron matched the grease stains on her soul. She waited tables. She carried coffee that never stayed hot long enough. She smiled at men who didn't deserve smiling and absorbed insults from women who blamed her for their divorces. She went home to a studio apartment that smelled like mildew and old cooking, and she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the folded flag, careful military corners, perfect triangular folds, the weight of it like holding a stone in her chest. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that her son, Marcus Torres, 15 years old and angry in the way that only children of broken parents can be angry, had been researching. Had been digging through boxes in her closet that she thought were hidden. Had found the shadow box she'd never unpacked. The one with a Navy cross. The silver stars. The purple hearts. The commendation citations with her name printed in official military formatting. Commander Rachel Elizabeth Torres. Extraordinary heroism. Established field hospital under fire. 72 hours. 14 lives. Marcus Torres, 10 days after his mother was fired from St. Michael's, walked into the hospital lobby carrying that shadow box like it was a bomb that needed defusing. He walked up to the security desk where an elderly veteran named Carl Jenkins was working the morning shift, and he said, very clearly, "My mom just got fired by Dr. Ashford. And I think you need to see these." The room didn't know it yet. But everything was about to change. Subscribe to see what happens next. Like if you think Rachel deserved better. Comment if you've ever been fired for doing the right thing, and share this story with someone who needs to know they're not alone.